Hey, welcome to Crossroads. I want to talk about something pretty serious today. I will say that President Donald Trump, or former president, is actually making a very serious mistake right now. He's been praising CCP leader Xi Jinping, and I want to explain why this is actually a pretty big issue, one which could actually cause a lot of harm to him maybe it'll affect his campaign, but even if it gets in, I think for the United States in the long run. Now, before I go into this, I want to say I've been a very strong supporter of Donald Trump, just generally. I don't think I've ever tried to hide it. I generally agree with a lot of his policies, but on this issue, this could prove to be a really fatal mistake. And I'll say two things. There's the old saying that steel sharpens steel. There's another saying, an older saying, that it says the best medicine is bitter to the tongue. Sometimes criticism is not meant to harm you. Criticism sometimes is meant to benefit you, and sometimes the medicine that is the most bitter can become the most beneficial. In other words, I'm saying this in hopes that Trump understands what he's doing, because again, this is a very fatal mistake he's making right now. While the world is waking up to the threat of the Chinese Communist Party, and they are right now, it appears that former President Donald Trump is actually backtracking. He's going the other way. And this is despite even recent attacks on Trump from CCP state media. And despite growing criticism of the Chinese regime's brutal policies. I think most of the world right now understands the brutality of the Chinese Communist Party and what it does to its own people. And it's a very odd stance for Trump. Trump, being a person who is really the global leader for conservatism, for capitalism, is oddly siding with the leader of the other side of the world, of communism, of totalitarianism, and of every brutal policy that those systems represent. The global populist movement right now, really aside from Trump, is working to break from the Chinese Communist Party. This is true with the new president in South Korea. It's true with the new libertarian president in Argentina. It's true with all these different populist leaders coming up who understand the nature of the Chinese Communist Party. And it raises the question, if Trump is part of this, growing populist movement, this breaking away from these communist systems, then why is he seemingly the only one who still holds these stances? Even President Joe Biden recently called Xi Jinping a dictator and a leader of a communist regime, even though he's still kind of cozying up with the CCP as well. But why is Trump still seemingly on board with Xi Jinping? Now look, to be fair, before the COVID-19 pandemic, the whole world was still relatively asleep when it came to the Chinese Communist Party. Most of the world did not understand the nature of the CCP. Trump was actually on the other side during that time, for the most part. He still called out China. He mostly talked about it in the business sense. Trump was trying to get a trade deal with China, and during that time, if you remember, he was in a mild trade war with the CCP. But during that time, despite the trade war, he was actually cozying up with Xi Jinping. This was Trump back in 2019. Watch.
And one of the reasons that he's a great leader, President Xi, and one of the reasons that China is a great country is they understand how life works. I have great respect for the fact that China called, they want to make a deal. I have great respect. And I have great respect for President Xi. And I think we're going to have a deal because now we're dealing on proper terms. They understand and we understand. But that's a great thing that happened. And they want to get something done. Now, maybe it won't get done, but this is the first time I've seen them where they really do want to make a deal. And I think that's a very positive step.
Now, remember the context of that. Trump was criticizing the Chinese Communist Party's trade policies, but he was also viewing the CCP almost entirely on business. And so he was saying, we're losing out on all of our business deals with China. This is a dumb move on behalf of the United States, and China's very smart because they're ripping us off. And that was basically his stance. When the Chinese Communist Party ceded the virus to the entire world, which they did, a lot of countries woke up. Remember what happened during that time. The Chinese Communist Party lied about the virus through the World Health Organization. The World Health Organization was making all these recommendations on lockdowns, on economic shutdowns, on mask mandates, even later on the vaccine mandates. The CCP during that time opened up its borders for international travel while restricting internal travel. What happened? The CCP spread the virus intentionally, and as it did that, it then began having its agents buy up all the PPE, personal protective equipment, which it then used. Remember, they talked about mask diplomacy? And during that time, when the CCP started getting really critical of other countries, they started threatening other countries with their wolf warrior diplomacy. Australia started seeing through it, and they changed their policies on China. India saw through it. They changed their policies on China. Germany, of all places, what I would regard as a fairly far-left country, changed its policies on China. In other words, opposing the CCP no longer became just a partisan issue. The world realized the nature of the Chinese Communist Party. They began seeing it for what it was. But for some reason, Trump was still praising Xi Jinping. And again, the stance appears to be because he was focused just on the business side. And here's a reminder. This is Trump in 2020. Watch. Sorry, it's a tweet. He said, one of the great things about our just signed giant trade deal with China is that it will bring both the USA and China closer together in so many other ways. Terrific work with President Xi, a man who truly loves his country. Much more to come. So Xi truly loves his country. Xi Jinping is one of the biggest abusers of the Chinese people in the history of the country. Xi Jinping carries out some of the most totalitarian, savage policies the world has ever witnessed. And I'll get into that in a minute. But the other big problem was that Trump appeared to believe the CCP's fake narratives. He seemed to buy into it. And so as Xi Jinping was lying to the world, as Xi Jinping was lying through the World Health Organization, Trump still seemed to believe what he was saying. Here's Trump in 2020 again, January. He said China has been working very hard to contain the virus. This is as they were spreading it to the whole world, mind you. He said the United States greatly appreciates their efforts in transparency. Transparency. If you remember, the CCP was rejecting any attempts to investigate the origin of the virus. The CCP was rejecting any attempts of auditing. To this day, we still haven't had actual investigations of the virus origin. But Trump continued and he said this. The United States greatly appreciates their efforts in transparency. It will work out well. In particular, on behalf of the American people, I want to thank President Xi. And Trump continued with this. This is February in 2020. He said, just had a long and very good conversation by phone with President Xi of China. He is strong, sharp, and powerfully focused on leading the counterattack on the coronavirus. He feels that they are doing very well, even building hospitals in a matter of only days. Of course, we know now what the CCP was actually doing. That hospital was a glorified concentration camp. We know for a fact that they were throwing people in there. It was a gulag. We know the CCP lied to the world through the World Health Organization to spread the virus. We know the CCP lied about its handling of the virus. We know the CCP lied about its economic recovery. Xi Jinping continued to lie to the world. And while many people saw this, most of the world saw it, I'd say, for some reason, Trump did not see it. These were Trump's statements at the time in February 2020. Watch.
Do you think President Xi should be doing something different?
No, I think President Xi is working very, very hard. I spoke to him. He's working very hard. I think he's doing a very good job. It's a big problem. But President Xi loves his country. He's working very hard to solve the problem, and he will solve the problem.
Now, what did solving the problem look like in China? Well, remember what it looked like in China at the time? People locked in their homes, many people dying, not from the virus, but from the CCP's policies. Remember the runs on the markets for food? People were starving to death because they literally were welded, police came and welded their doors shut. This was a video of people in Shanghai locked in their homes, screaming from their windows.
这个是真的来叫，好了，终于2万人，所有人都在叫，要命了。
And during that time as well, the Chinese Communist Party used the virus and used the pandemic to deepen its religious persecutions. The CCP, as we speak, is carrying out several genocides. There's cultural genocide against Xinjiang and Tibet. There's religious genocide against Falun Gong practitioners, Uyghurs, and Christians. Mosques, temples, and churches during the pandemic, they were taken over by the CCP. Churches were transformed into cult shrines where people could only worship CCP leaders, and among the only people they could worship was Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping took God out of the temples and put his face in place of God, and that was all you could worship in China. Let me show you some pictures of this. This is 2019 bitter winter. They said it's in its drive to eradicate religions. China's totalitarian regime relentlessly demolishes places of worship, converts temples, mosques, and churches into government-run centers where religious symbols are replaced with portraits of the country's president, Xi Jinping, and propaganda materials. And it says that while losing their places of worship, the religions are not allowed to practice their faith, even in the privacy of their homes. Officials raid their residences to remove crosses, Christian crosses, and images of saints and deities, ordering to replace them with the only divinity allowed to be worshipped in China, President Xi Jinping. This is real. Xi Jinping has placed himself as a god in China, and he's overthrowing religions and making it so that people worship him as if he were God. This practice swept the country in China. They even replaced Christian and Catholic symbols with pictures of Xi Jinping and Mao Zedong. They were removing statues, removing crosses, removing pictures of Jesus, and putting statues of Mao Zedong in their place. And people were encouraged to go worship and pray to Mao Zedong, and Xi Jinping was often right beside him. This is again 2019 bitter winter. Let me show you these pictures. This is what it actually looks like in China. This is what the pandemic looked like in China. This is 2020 bitter winter. Let me show you these pictures. The CCP is a genocidal regime. The CCP has been using the powers given to it by the pandemic and the powers given to it through these lockdowns and other policies to further its religious persecutions. The CCP used this as a power grab. And I would argue they used it to crash our economy. They used it to force lockdowns because they knew their economy was failing and they wanted the whole world to go down with them. And then as the whole world was going down, the CCP lied to the world, saying their economy was recovering and they were opening back up and claiming that they were handling everything right. And our investment firms poured money into China. And unfortunately, during that time, Trump was praising them for this. And unfortunately as well, while Xi carried out the CCP's torch, really carrying it out to burn churches, destroy religions, desecrate temples, and even further its campaigns of torture, slavery, and genocide, Donald Trump did not change his positions on Xi Jinping. This is 2020. Trump said this: "Our relationship with China has now probably never, ever been better." And Trump continued saying that Xi Jinping, he said, quote, "He's for China. I'm for the U.S. But other than that, we love each other." Now, this has not stopped. Last year, even, Trump appeared to praise Xi Jinping's brutality. Watch.
I got to know a lot of the foreign leaders, and let me tell you, unlike our leader, they're at the top of their game. These are like central casting. There's nobody that could play the role in Hollywood. All of Hollywood, nobody can play the role of President Xi of China. Nobody could play the role. He's a fierce person. He rules with an iron fist 1.5 billion people. Yeah, I'd say he's smart. Wouldn't you say he's smart?
Now, look, ruling with an iron fist, he's a fierce person, but he's smart. I mean, it's concerning, to be honest. And unfortunately, Trump still has not changed this position. He's still saying these things. This is from his recent interview with Tucker Carlson from earlier this year. Watch.
How smart is he? Could you tell?
Top of the line.
Top of the line.
Yeah, they're all top of the line. Our guy's not top of the line. Never was. These are top of the line people at the top of their game. President Xi is a brilliant man. If you went all over Hollywood to look for somebody to play the role of President Xi, you couldn't find it. There's nobody like that. The look, the brain, the whole thing. We had a great relationship.
Now, look, you could argue that Trump is just trying to make a deal. You could argue that he's just saying, you know, Xi Jinping, he controls his country of different positions, but, you know, he controls the country. Maybe he's still criticizing him to an extent. That's not what Trump is doing, unfortunately. Trump is even declining to comment on key humanitarian issues in China because he doesn't want to offend Xi Jinping. You know, case in point, Trump even declined to comment during that interview on whether he'd defend Taiwan, as during another interview actually, because he was concerned that talking about that would harm his relationship with Xi Jinping. He is censoring himself under the CCP's guidelines because he does not want to offend Xi Jinping. Watch this.
Should Taiwan be independent?
So if I tell you an answer, it's going to hurt me in negotiations on the assumption that I win. But I have a very good relationship with President Xi. After COVID came in, I sort of didn't want the relationship, and I sort of ended the relationship after having made one of the greatest trade deals ever made, including USMCA, Mexico, Canada. It's
would
not
you,
just tough.
If China
it's being
invaded
smart.
Taiwan, would you go to war to
I
defend
don't
Taiwan?
want to say that because that hurts me in negotiations with regard to President Xi.
Now, look, that being said, the Chinese Communist Party recently took some jabs at Trump. They're attacking him right now. And in my opinion, because look, I've been reporting on the CCP and its strategies, including for political warfare, for, you know, close to 2 decades now. I've followed things like this. I've watched how politicians get corrupted by the CCP. I know there's strategies for it. I've reported heavily on it. My reporting has put people in prison who have engaged in these types of behaviors. I understand how the CCP works. I'll say right now, they're very likely testing Trump's position. They want to see how Trump responds, and that's going to be very deeply important. They're using a charm campaign against him right now, and they're showing him two sides. They understand one of Trump's unfortunate... in some ways, you could say it's a part of a good part of his nature. You could also say it has its negative sides. If you're nice to Trump, he tends to trust you. And look where that's gotten him. How many people that he's surrounded himself with, how many of them backstabbed him? He's a trusting person, in my personal opinion. I think Trump's a very trusting person. But sometimes people put on a facade. They put on a fake mask because they're trying to manipulate you. And I think that Xi Jinping will backstab Trump worse than anyone else who backstabbed him. If Trump goes along with this, he's going to fall into their trap. I will say it right now. Now, this is Newsweek criticizing Trump, this is Newsweek on the CCP criticizing Trump just recently, last week, in fact. It said Chinese state media took a shot at the former President Donald Trump on Wednesday, just hours before a meeting between President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping, CCP leader, not president, by the way. It says state-run newspaper, the Global Times, which is the mouthpiece of the CCP, one of them, published an editorial Wednesday knocking Trump for imposing sanctions on Chinese nationals in 2019 over a dispute about the flow of fentanyl into the United States from China. Sorry about that, folks. A camera issue. Now, I want to say generally, I support Donald Trump. I've never hidden this. If I have any bias, that's probably it. I don't think I've ever said otherwise. You know, generally, I like his policies. Generally, I think he can do a lot of good for the United States. But I'll say also that this could be a fatal trap for Trump. I'm not saying this to criticize him. I'm not saying these things to go after him. I'm saying it because I genuinely hope that he understands what the CCP is doing. Again, back to those sayings, steel sharpens steel. The best medicine is bitter to the tongue. Sometimes criticism is meant to help you. The CCP right now is playing a game. And if Trump continues on this path with the CCP and Xi Jinping, I believe he's going to start losing a lot of key support. And I'll explain why. This loss of support is very likely going to spread to anyone who cares about human rights abuses, religious persecution, and the brutality of the Chinese Communist regime, which is going to become better and better known because the CCP right now is crumbling. And as it crumbles, its crimes are going to be exposed to the world. If Trump attaches himself to the CCP during this time, and Xi Jinping especially, he will be casted in that same light, and he will be connected to it during that collapse. This could be devastating for Trump. Let me be clear, Xi Jinping is a brutal tyrant. History is going to remember Xi Jinping for his abuses of the Chinese people. As the truth comes out, which it will, the world is going to see how the Chinese Communist Party has been torturing, enslaving, and mass murdering the Chinese people. The Chinese Communist Party has killed between 70 million and 100 million people over the last 100 years. Xi Jinping is the head of that regime, and he's still carrying out many of those same brutal policies. That is going to be the legacy of Xi Jinping. That is going to be the memory of the world for Xi Jinping. That is more people, by the way, than every major war over the last 100 years combined. Keep that in mind. Now, when we talk about leaders in history, we don't just look at their business practices. We don't judge them by their economics. We look at how they treated their people. You know, Caligula, when we talk about him, we don't look at the height of the Roman Empire or the decline of the Roman Empire. We look at the brutality of his policies. When we look at Adolf Hitler, we don't remember him for his economic policies in Germany. He's remembered for the concentration camps and for mass murder. Business is not the measure of a regime's civility. Business is not the measure of a civilization. This is going to be Xi Jinping's legacy. Savage brutality, genocide, murder, and slavery. And if Donald Trump sides with Xi Jinping on that, he will also be reflected in that legacy. This is very serious. And again, I'm not trying to criticize Trump on this. I'm saying this as a warning. I'm saying this as someone who generally, and I think very openly, tends to support his policies. This could prove fatal for Donald Trump. Not just for his campaign, and even if he does get in, it could prove fatal for his administration and fatal for the future of the United States if the United States makes deals with the CCP, if the United States connects itself to the CCP, and if especially the United States does that again and has other countries follow them into that same trap. Because the CCP's model for the future is the China model. The CCP's model for the future is the quote-unquote China dream. And their slogan is that you live, or we live, you die. They believe that in the world, the CCP cannot coexist with the United States. Their goal is to destroy the United States. That is Xi Jinping's goal for the United States. And if being nice to Trump is the way to achieve that, then Xi Jinping is going to do it. They have not changed a single policy against the U.S. And again, that's the way charm campaigns work. You can't just judge things by the nice things someone says on the surface. They can say something nice and then backstab you the first chance they get. That is how the CCP operates. And I believe very strongly that's what they're doing right now. Now, folks, that's it for YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. For the rest of this episode, join me on Epoch TV. I'll be talking more about some other stories, including how the New York Times, interestingly, appears to be doing a 180 on lockdown narratives. You can get the link to that in the description below this video. Also, I will not be doing an episode tomorrow on Thanksgiving, but I will be back on Friday, same time, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. I wish you and your family a happy Thanksgiving.